A very good morning to you. If you are in Ghana and any other part of the world, hello to you. It's been a rainy couple of days, but that hasn't stopped us from making the time to join in for our webinar, second quarter webinar of Participatory Development Associates. If you are not too familiar with us as an organization, I encourage you to check out our website, www.pdaghana.com, or check out our social media platforms through Facebook, through X, formerly known as Twitter, through Instagram, through LinkedIn, and even on YouTube. And you'll be able to get access to a lot of information about who we are, what we do, and why we do what we do. If you are joining us, we welcome you to today's conversation, which promises to be a very beneficial one to all of us, especially those of us who are in the development sector, who work in any aspect of the knowledge value chain. Our topic for today is Indigenous Knowledge Systems in Evaluation Practice. And we are very lucky to have a whole slew of very knowledgeable experts who are with us. So we'll be introducing them as and when it is time for them to speak. But do just take note of a few housekeeping rules for the sake of clarity across the network and across the call. We've muted most participants, so you wouldn't be able to unmute yourself until we finish the presentations and get to the portion of the webinar where you'll be able to ask questions. But in the meantime, if you do want to comment, you do want to put anything in the chat, feel free to make use of the chat function in Microsoft Teams. Alternatively, you can use the Q&A feature that has been enabled so that everybody who is presenting, everyone who is on call will be able to see exactly what you are sharing. We also are discouraging, for the sake of the network, the use of your video camera unless you are presenting officially. So for them, we will give access to use their videos as and when they are speaking. Other than that, I believe that this time will be a very edifying and educational time for all of us. And welcome once again to all of you who are on call. We have our first speaker for today, Mrs. Diddy Muard. Many of us may know her, especially those of us within the evaluation sphere in Ghana and even in Africa and across the world. She is the coordinator of the Ghana Monitoring and Evaluation Forum, but her work has spanned across board, both privately, publicly, working with international partners all over the world, and not just across evaluation issues, but also gender and women's rights, development issues, equality, poverty issues. We are very privileged to have her with us. In fact, she's had a packed schedule, but she made time to speak to us. So Auntie Diddy, if you are on call, we welcome you to open the webinar for us.
Good morning. I hope you can see me and hear me as well. It's a little chilly now, so my voice is cracking, but I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can. Good to see you.
Great. Thank you. And thank you so much for the invitation. As usual, PDA is up to something exciting and interesting, and I'm happy to be part of it. Congratulations on this as well. So this morning we are looking at Indigenous Knowledge Systems. So I like to start my presentations with, something interesting and something African. So I have two of my favorite African proverbs here. One says that if you close your eyes to facts, you will learn through accidents. So if you don't look at the facts, then accidents will teach you sometimes a painful lesson, but then you will learn. And the other one is also exciting because it's two young people very busy dancing. And what does it say? It says that the rhythm of the music changes, and so the dance step must also change. For those of us who are from Ghana or any other part of Africa, very often when the music changes, it also means that there's a dance step that goes with it. So if you were dancing Palogo or Agbaja, from the southern part of Ghana, and the music changed to something from the central or northern part of Ghana, we would expect you to start doing Adoa or doing, Damba or something from that part of the country. It's the same when it comes to development. The times have changed. Things have really spanned up. And now the interest is, from years we have imported, as it were in quotes, evaluation. And maybe from the objective perspective, it makes sense that sometimes you need an outsider to come in and see what you have done and help you to evaluate, measure progress, and check how far you're going, how well you're doing. Yes, but then you see there's another African proverb that says that the stranger has big eyes. When you enter a place and you don't know the place, you're looking all around, you're curious, you're seeing everything. But actually, you don't know as much as you see. And you need a local person, somebody who lives within the context to give you the real meaning of some of the things you're seeing. Because as they say, you may see it, but what you see is not always the whole truth. Next slide. So if it Made in Africa evaluation pushes for evaluation that is rooted in Africa, evaluation that has its foundation in Africa, which is led by Africans and is founded within our context. So we look at expertise, we are asking about what are the priorities and what are our values. And of course, along with our values come the philosophies, the things we believe in, our indigenous knowledge systems. So increasingly, we are trying to make sure that all these things inform or they are part of the evaluation theory and practice of the world. So that if somebody comes in from Europe, from Asia, any part of the world, and they want to do an evaluation in Africa, they are cognizant of these things. They take into account what is the indigenous knowledge, what is it that the people believe in, and if we can move on. So if you look at this slide, I have a picture here showing a typical scene where you would have people telling stories. Now, one of the interesting aspects of Indigenous knowledge, or IKS, is that it looks at storytelling. Our people love to be oral about our lives. We love to talk about ourselves. And we do it with stories. We do it with songs. We do it with proverbs. And then when we are taking decisions, a lot of times it's communal. And then there's a reflection, as a community, as a family, as a society. We try to look at ourselves and ask, so one person speaks and another person can also interject. Somebody can communicate. It's dynamic, it's evolving. And so what may have been our story last year, this year when you talk to somebody, they'll tell you, no, that has changed. We've changed government and certain things have changed. Our lives have become, it's evolved. We used to fetch water from the stream. Now we've moved to a tap. It's right behind my house. And all I do is I push a button up and down and there's water flowing through my taps. It's also for accountability. Communities use this to hold each other accountable, to hold their leaders accountable, to hold individuals accountable, to ask governments and even people like us who go into their community from other communities to help them, development partners, if it's an NGO, a CSO, even a local group of women and men or young people who try to do things in their community. These are ways in which they hold them accountable. So we are singing a song that says, last year we were dancing, we're dancing very, very well in this place. Now it has become a community center. What has changed? What has changed? It's become a song, that it's a song that holds people accountable. We gave you money. What did you do with it? And yet the sad thing is that with all these dynamic and interesting ways of learning about how development is working, it's missing from a lot of our project design and assessment frameworks. And that is the reason why such a discussion is important, so that we bring it back to the table. When we are developing our terms of reference, we remember that there are these methods, there are these tools that we can use, and it will involve the people more, and it will give us the real picture. Yes, if we can continue. So in Ghana, there's an example called Inkosuo, and PDA will be sharing more about this, where communities evaluate their progress through communal dialogue, proverbs, folklore, land-based wisdom. And this is handed down from generation to generation. Now, I'll let PDA talk about that one, but I want to share a little bit from an example from Cameroon called Tory Day, which is a local or pidgin version of storytelling, and how Abbe, an NGO based in Cameroon, is using this for participatory evaluation in communities with children and other vulnerable groups like internally displaced persons. I thought this was an interesting example to pick because not only does it maintain the oral form, but they've moved it into social media as well, and looking at how they can put some of this out on the net as well. So can we move on to look a little bit at Tory Day and how it works in Cameroon? Yes. So my slide, please. Okay, so why is Tory Day important? What are some of the principles, the African principles in evaluation that it promotes? Yes. So storytellers are knowledge keepers. They are like researchers. Now, for somebody to be able to tell you a story, he or she must have the facts. They need to go behind the scene and find out what's happening. So they promote things like trust, core values of our communities. Ubuntu is about humanity. It's about connectiveness, our community, people-centered approaches. Knowledge is not complete until it reaches the people. It promotes the thinking that, look, you can't just walk in and think you've got the knowledge. No, you need to include people if you want to say that you have knowledge. And it's important that we recognize this in a very oral community where people don't write so much, but they believe in sharing what they know. They share their personal experiences. And what does it do? It helps to complement the quantitative methods of evaluation that we're used to. So you may have gone in with your questionnaire as usual, you pick up all kinds of data, but it lacks the humanness that you get when you add all this qualitative information. Yes, please. Next slide. Okay, so as we move on, you will find out that this is based, it's founded on core aspects of what we believe in as, a people. What is it that we practice? What is it that we do in our communities? So I picked up a bit of, how they use these diaries or these Tory Day stories. So the stories are recounted in a Dear Diary style. So it's assuming that you are a first person, it's me or you writing in your diary. And look, so it's based on experiences. You're talking about what has been happening. So if there's a phenomenon, there's a problem or an issue or an intervention, what's been my experience around it? If it's a girl, let's say it's a girl talking about her experiences at school. And in this particular example, they looked at internally displaced people. So they'll look at a poor, vulnerable girl, a young girl who's been, maybe taken away from her family. What's her experience with this challenge? Interventions that maybe some NGOs or CSOs have taken up to support them. What's been her experience with it? And what are some of the outcomes? And then we'll try to document. Again, the advantage with this kind of process is that we document. So it doesn't stay at the oral level, but now we are adding some documentation. So 10 years down the line, 20 years down the line, we can use it to evaluate what has happened and also to learn for future generations. And of course, it helps us to track progress, having a good flow of what has happened and how did it work. Now, some of the stories recounted, come up with things like, and here there are a few statements for some of them. Today, when I entered the classroom, my friends were very receptive. Now, for somebody who's been displaced, moved from one part of the country to another part of the country, this is important because they probably lost family and friends. And so they are looking out for who will support me. And then she says, or he says, they supported me with food and a pen. They asked if I was okay and if I needed anything more. So in the first person, language, he or she is telling us what the experiences have been with the classroom. So if somebody was, an assessment of a project to help school children be assimilated, internally displaced children, then this would help you see, oh yes, okay, our project is making progress because the children are feeling settled in. A second statement says, today the teacher told us that one hand no the tie bundle. For those of us who speak pidgin, we get it. It means one hand, you cannot tie a bundle of sticks with one hand. You need different hands, or you need two hands to be able to tie a bundle of sticks. And that means that we must be supportive to our friends. I no longer worry about the war. So if this young person has come from a war situation, he or she is telling us now that, I'm feeling so well supported that I'm not too worried about the war anymore. Okay, and as you can see from the picture, they are all huddled up. They're having a group hug, which is really heartwarming, isn't it? And this would include children from outside the community and those in the community who've come together. Next slide, please. So here you can't see the picture very well, but it's a group of people sitting under a tree, a very big tree, and it's filled 3/4 of the picture, and they are watching a screen. So some of these things are documented in video, and then a discussion is had around it. So you can see a group of children with some facilitators sitting under the tree. So their stories are collected in different ways. So participants or the children themselves can write, which is the best. But they also do audio recordings, which they can share, audio and video recordings that they can share. And then sometimes teachers and parents can assist to write in their diaries. So they will write it down for the children, just like the example we read earlier. And then this can be recounted or read by the children when they're trying to do the assessment. Please move on. So all these processes ensure that the children are at the center of it. They are part of it. They are the ones who lead the process. They are in the discussion. They are into it. They are the ones who tell us what is going on and what works for them. Next slide, please. So this is to ensure that we don't miss their voices. We don't miss their stories. Can I have my next slide? Yes. So why is this important? This is important so that we can ensure the fidelity, the truth. We can ensure that we are getting it from the person who's actually at the forefront of whatever is going on. So we can stay true to the events, we can stay true to the facts, and then we to make it to assess what these stories are. There are 3 types of stories. They check which ones are true. I mean, you can check, you have all the facts. You know, this is almost perfectly true. Then the alternative true is the one that you're not too sure about. You know, there may be some misinformation or personal interpretations. You know, we are human. So listening to a story about somebody, I may have, you know, misinterpreted it or put on my own meaning, or as our people will say, you do some lip service to it, some kokonsa or some gossip small came inside. And by the time I added my own pepper and salt and spices to the story, it's actually changed the whole story. It's no longer a boy who was in trouble. Now it's a girl, and I've added my own bits. Now that is called an alternative true story. So there's a bit of fact, but it's not fully, wholly true. Then, of course, there are the false stories, factually inaccurate, deliberately misleading, or for some reason, personally self-serving. So people can put out false stories. So these stories, they then, you know, tag with colors. So red are those that are non-aligned with intended outcomes. So as the children recount their story, they look at it and say, oh, we did not plan for this to go this way. This is not the way our project has gone. We had planned for it to go in this direction, but it's gone in the other direction. Or I've struggled. I've been through a lot of trauma. So that's a red story. A green story goes with positive experiences. It's aligned with the internal outcome. So we planned that all the children will be put in this school will have more support, they would not be taken advantage of, and everything is working well. If we find out that, unfortunately, when we put them in the schools, some people were taking advantage of them, it becomes a red story. But if they get into school, and like we heard from the young person, now they have a lot of support, they're happy, they're growing well, we can call it a green story. The gray ones are the ones that are unclear. They're a bit confused. You know, it's like the alternative true. It's a mix of facts and fiction and misinterpretation. And sometimes it's when people are still in the process of behavior change. They're still looking at, we are training young people to be sexually active, but with with guidance, with protection. And so they are still in the process. So the story is muddied. On one hand, it's good. On the other hand, it's not so good. So it's a great story. Next slide, please. So in between all of this, we're working with the young people to assess, is the situation a red situation? Is it a green one? Is it gray? Are we making progress? What do we need to change? We are learning along the way. Next slide, please. So this then helps the people who are implementing the project, as well as the beneficiaries, to assess how things have worked for them. Okay, so how does this push Made in Africa evaluation principles? Tory Day helps us to look at Ubuntu, humanity and relationality, how we relate to each other, our community. Knowledge is collective and it's relational. It's not about the individual. As we heard, the stories about me and my mates, me and my friends, the community, they were supportive. And because it's community driven, it looks at collective participation. It also looks at indigenous knowledge systems, traditions, proverbs, myths. It promotes proverbs and folklore, oral histories. As we said, even when it's recorded, it comes from somebody telling a story. Decolonization, we are moving from the old ways of assessing impacts to now more African-centered, interesting, native stories that we are part of. Evaluation should reflect local values and cultures. So, and languages, as you can imagine, Tory Day is in Pidgin English, which is the form of English that these young people speak every day on the streets. It could be in Tree, it could be in Ga, it could be in Hausa, it could be in any language that is the people's language and they speak and understand. And it's tailored to their specific context. Okay, it's about participation, mentioned that already. And even more important is about transformational change. What is changing in the community? How is it changing? Tory Day helps to track some of this. And I'm sure when they talk about the in Kosovo, they will also tell us how that works. Next slide, please. So I'm really, before I forget, just in case at the end I don't have time, I'd like to acknowledge eBase and thank them so much for their contribution to this presentation and also the good work they're doing in Cameroon. So some challenges, some practical and ethical considerations are, can we move? Next slide, please. So some of the challenges that one would expect is the whole question about tools and standards. Whose standards are we using? Is it the OECD DAC? Is it our own standards? What does it mean for us? So there is that contention. But I think at the end of the day, you find out that they are complementary. They build on each other. So you can pick some of the DAC standards and still find that you have relevant African standards that match up to that, so that it's feasible. It's something you can work with, even if you're not African, but you're working within the African context. So it's about openness, it's about participation versus conflicting interest. So I've come into a community, my interest is to, as I see it, help the community develop. But sometimes my perspective of what is called development may be quite different from what the communities is. So this gives you an opportunity to be open about what your expectations are. Community is also expressing their views, and then we can come to a good compromise and avoid some of the conflicts that come up in development projects. Time, language, and other resource constraints. In the picture, you can see it's dark. Sometimes it would mean that you would have to stay out at very inconvenient times for the outsider, because the community are only available in the evenings, and for them this is entertainment. So there will be some challenges around time. It also means that resources, need extra resources. If it was during the day, you just need to find some chairs to sit on, will be fine. But at night, you may have to provide extra electricity, look at lanterns and lights to make sure that the place is well lit. All these things will take some more resources. And then, of course, the question of language. If I moved from my home base to another community in another part of the country, very likely I wouldn't speak the language. So I'd need to get a local person to help you with translation. And we all know in the process of translation, sometimes you lose some of the nuances and some of the meanings. But then that is where you need the local people to tell you what it means for them and not just yours. And of course, there's this whole issue of oral tradition and documentation. Next slide, please. So we need to find a way of bridging some of this. And this is where I think the modern technology comes in handy. We can record some of this. We can sit with people and get them to look at a recording and say, yes, 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 that's right. No, that's not what we meant. You didn't interpret our meaning well. So it helps us to promote co-creating. So it's no longer just the external evaluator putting his or her impressions on a project or an assessment, but he or she working with the community to co-create. Accountability is promoted, learning, of course, and inclusion, because in doing this, we bring the whole society together. I'm rounding up now, so my next slide, please. So the thing about promoting all this is to ensure that we are getting everybody on board. So even if there are young girls who are very shy, usually would not speak, once we start a song and we are dancing and we are going around and drawing everybody into the circle to dance, you find out that even these young ones will run in also. And again, it's fun. It's a lot of fun and games. So they are able to participate, they're able to give their best. And you do, if you are well able to record it, to put some analysis into it, you actually get first-hand information from the young people. In conclusion, we're looking at policies and institutional processes that would help some of these things. First one is that we need to promote some of these concepts. It's about time when we are developing terms of reference, we are looking at what are the indigenous processes, what are some of the indigenous systems that we can tap into. Where will we get the participation? How can we ensure that Ubuntu is not forgotten? The people, the collective community, how do we ensure that they are there? So if you're on an international evaluation team, please promote some of these things as part of the terms of reference. Current Western evaluation needs to be contextualized. So if you're even coming in from the West and you've been given an assignment, you're wonderful. You come at it with new eyes, fresh ideas, which is great. But just remember that you're working within a context where there are people who live there and understand it better than you do, so that you learn and you also share with them. Use AI and social media to cross the digital divide. I think this is one of the most forward-looking ways of looking at our indigenous knowledge now. There's so much that our people have to share. Some of it's so exciting, some of it's so interesting, but because it's not documented, we can't share it. But that's the reason why technology is there. Put it on TikTok so that you can share it with the young people. And we all know our kids are on their phones 24/7 now. So if anything is on that phone, they will pick it, they will understand it, and they'll use it. Okay, so what are some of the things that this helps us to promote, and how can AI help us to enhance it? Orality and storytelling, sorry. This relies on African oral storytelling, and it's AI powered, and we can use speech to text to help us document and preserve some of this. In indigenous knowledge systems, such as our laws, folk tales, proverbs, community wisdom, we can use AI-powered NLP and sentiment analysis to detect patterns, and then we document some of these and share them. Decolonizing evaluation moves away from the Western quantitative, and now helps us to focus on some more qualitative storytelling dashboards, present some maps, some graphs that show us, how things have changed, the trends over time. Community participation, now the community are part of the process, especially when you are documenting things like stories and songs and folklore. You get them to be involved. And AI-powered chatbots and mobile platforms can collect real-time stories. And the interesting thing about it is, because it's real-time, you can actually use it to assess progress and the differences over time, over a period. Okay, and finally, transformational impact. This focuses on the lived experiences rather than just the numbers. So now we are looking at people's real experiences, not just what they've documented, as, yeah, these are the numbers, but now we can see people and we can use AI-powered narrative analytics to track behavioral and emotional changes over time. I believe this is my last but one slide. Can I go to the last one? And then I'll be, very good. So on this slide, for those who don't speak any Ghanaian language and one African language, I put out thank you in different forms. So Nyechumio is from my mother language, Kobo, Nangode from the north, Hausa, Medasi from the central part of Ghana, thank you. Yeruadon from the southern part of Ghana in Accra, where I sit right now. Akbenao, thank you from our ever brothers and sisters in Eastern Ghana, the southeast part of Ghana, and of course, Asante Sana from East Africa. Thank you so much.
Thank you as well so much. And my name is Asida. It draws on the Medase from the Ashanti region of Ghana. So we are so grateful, Auntie Dede. These have been very thought-provoking. I can see that there's already been a couple of comments in the chat box. People are raising their hands trying to, ask questions. But do please remember you can send all your comments, send all your questions using the chat box or the Q&A feature. We'll make sure to give some time after our second presenter speaks so that all of these questions can be addressed. And we are glad to be seeing some connections happening as well. We've shared Auntie Dede's email address in the chat box in case you want to follow up with some of these conversations with her personally. And also a representative from eBase is here. We're excited about the work that is being done using the Tory Day methodology. So I'm sure that we might have some time later on to discuss that. We want to swiftly hand over now to our next speaker for today. Mr. Alexander Afram is the manager of PDA's own Research Evaluation and Learning Unit, and he's had a wealth of experience across different evaluation, learning, and together with some members of the Research Evaluation and Learning team, they were able to put together and publish a paper about unpacking local-led evaluation systems. And he's here today to continue the conversation from where Auntie Dede left off. Alex, if you are on call, we want to hand over to you now.
Hello, Afra. Yes, thank you very much.
Yes, hello, we can hear you and see you.
Yes.
Yeah, very welcome, and we are glad to have you.
Thank you. So, do you want me to share my screen from here?
Yes, please feel free and go ahead.
Okay, right.
And sorry, just before Alex continues, I see that there's quite a number of AI assistants in the meeting. If it wouldn't be too much of a bother to you, we would like to request you can just put a pause on their activities so that we can focus on the conversation in real time together. Thank you. Alex, over to you, please.
Thank you. Can you see my screen?
We can, yes.
Okay, all right. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. And after that, thank you, Auntie Dede. I think my presentation actually follows up from what Auntie Dede earlier presented, and it actually sets the grounds for what I want to share in the next few minutes. So I'm presenting on what I'm calling unpacking African-led evaluation through the lens of collaborative autoethnography. This is a research piece and a paper we produced here at PDA last year as a contribution to the Made in Africa evaluation conversation that is currently ongoing. So I'll be speaking briefly about, the rationale for, developing this paper, what is the case for African-led evaluation? What approach did we use to develop or produce this paper, and some of the findings that we put across in the paper, and some conclusions. So like I said before, last year at PDA, we, as part of contributing to the conversation on African-led or Made in Africa evaluation, we designed or developed a paper that we called that's what to look at how do we encourage Africans to dominate or lead in evaluations in Africa. And the reason why we decided to do this is that I think when you look at the evaluation debate and you go into the literature of Made in Africa evaluation, or even the literature on evaluation in general, you realize that the dominant finding is that evaluations in Africa are usually, dominated by external evaluators, mainly from the Western world. And this is linked to the way development itself originated and has evolved over the years, mainly donor-driven, and these donors are usually not, based in Africa. And so this has also influenced the way evaluation itself has evolved over the years. Now, because evaluations in Africa are dominated by external evaluators, it's also heavily influenced by Western models, as the previous presenter alluded to. We usually go with standardized evaluation metrics and criteria, and these are things that have been developed largely from the Western side of the world, and we adopt them and we use them as such. And so the core and the conversation on African-led evaluation is a call for a shift to an African-owned, or to allow Africans to tell their own stories. And I think the core rationale or motivation here is that when we allow Africans to tell their own story, they will definitely tell it better because they understand the context better, and would tell it to reflect the values and the priorities and the knowledge systems and the philosophical orientations of our people. So the purpose of our paper largely is to contribute, like I said earlier, to the Made in Africa evaluation, and to advance the discussions on how we can let evaluations reflect more African knowledge systems and values and the local context in general. Now, how did we come by this paper? We apply a unique methodology we call the collaborative ethnography. This is a unique qualitative methodology that combines elements of ethnography, biography, but essentially it's a methodology that allows the researcher to explore personal experiences, experiential learning, and used scenarios within their context, their social context and cultural orientation to tell their story. The more unique feature about collaborative autoethnography here, and as we applied it, is that the researchers were actually the research, or the researcher is also the research in this case. Or what I mean here is that the people who are the authors of this report, of this paper, were also the ones that provided the data. They reflected and shared their own experiences, having worked in evaluation contests in Africa for many years, and that's how we came by it. So, like I said, it's a self-reflective experiential method where we allow African evaluators to examine evaluation practices in Africa as they have experienced it, having led and participated in evaluation themselves. So they examine their own roles and experiences in the evaluations that they have conducted, and examined the wider cultural, political, and social meanings and understandings that we assign to things here in Africa, and how those things also are linked or can influence evaluation and evaluation outcomes. So in this particular paper, we have 7 African collaborators or evaluators. These are our evaluators with years of experience across at least 5 African countries, but also beyond Africa in the UK and Australia as well. And we conducted 5 rounds of data collection, 1 per week, and these data collections took the form of individual reflections, but also group discussions where collectively the group met, discussed, refined ideas, critique, and so on. So that is it. So we also use tools like images, neighbors checking themselves, and peer debriefing, and other forms of gathering knowledge or information that we believe are relevant to our context. And this is how we came by data or information to analyze for this paper on African-led evaluation. Now, why did we choose to deviate from the conventional way of doing research or gathering information to write papers like this? We believe that this approach actually elevates voices of Africans and African evaluators. So, and a unique approach like the collaborative ethnography allows voices of African evaluators to be heard in this case. And also, it also aligns well with indigenous, ways of knowing and indigenous methodologies, which also reflect values of self-determination, cultural protocols, and then community engagement. And then it encourages critical self-reflection so that issues of subjectivity is minimized, because individuals reflect, but also their colleagues check what they are saying, and then the ideas are fairly refined before they are accepted as evidence for the analysis. Okay, so what did we learn in this process? Now, one of the things we sought out to do is to understand what do we mean by African-led evaluation, or sometimes we say locally led evaluation. Now, the discussions and the reflections that we did, we realized that African-led evaluation, or sometimes I would say locally led evaluation, I may be using these terms interchangeably, is quite complex, and it's a term that is also evolving, right? Because on the surface, we can simply say that when we say African-led evaluation, then Africans must be at the helm or must be the ones leading these evaluation activities, so that they can also influence the decision making and ground the evaluation properly in the context within which the evaluation is happening. But then our discussions also led us to the understanding that evaluation, or the African-led evaluation, can actually go beyond just mere identity of the evaluator. But I think it's more important to look at how well the context comes in terms of what methods are we using, how well we have refined these methods to reflect the local context and all of that. So merely having Africans leading sometimes may not necessarily mean that they are applying all the principles of contextualization and reliance on or application of indigenous knowledge systems and so on in the evaluation process. So those things must be intentionally present before we can say indeed the evaluation is locally led, African led, but also is organized in a way that reflects the needs and aspirations of the Africans and their communities. So we also conceptualized African-led evaluation. In the process of doing this, we said, okay, what image can we use to represent or conceptualize African-led evaluation? So we asked people to use images, give images that they think will better present the what we are calling African-led evaluation. And surprisingly, two of the members brought the same image, which is what you see on the screen, a growing palm tree. And the rationale or the interpretation here is that we see African evaluation as something that is growing and is still evolving. Now, the concept of the palm tree is that it is diverse. First of all, it has roots that are connected to the systems and the things around, and that is what actually makes it relevant and allows it to flourish and progress. And so it is also important that so when you're looking at evaluation, it is important that there's a proper connection with the local community, knowledge system, and cultural practices. And so that it's also represented by the palm tree, having the various branches, aside from the roots, having all the branches that connects to the larger bio or ecosystem that it finds itself. So we also came to the realization that African-led evaluation does not guarantee cultural relevance or use of indigenous knowledge systems. Or when we say Africans are leading, so African leadership basically does not necessarily guarantee relevance or use of indigenous knowledge system. What we are saying is that, or what we found and our discussions led us to, is that just having Africans or people who call themselves Africans leading an evaluation, does not automatically lead to relevant adaptation and application of indigenous knowledge systems. It is possible to have evaluations led by Africans, but it's overly Western-centric in terms of frameworks, indicators, and even ways of analysis and so on and so forth. And so it is important that once we talk about African-led evaluation, the idea of making evaluation reflect the values and making the relevant adaptations to the local context and knowledge systems is important. Otherwise, just having people who identify as Africans it's not enough, for us to call an evaluation an African-led in the proper term or in the proper use of the term. So, like I said earlier, one of the things that we found is that when we say Africans or the local people are leading the evaluation, the definition there is very fluid. It's quite diverse because it's also defined by things like language, culture, cultural alignment, and community perception. And here the argument was that, so for example, in Ghana, when we say a local person is leading an evaluation in Ghana, how do we define that local person? Does being a Ghanaian qualify you enough to be a true local person, knowing that our culture is very diverse, dynamic? We have several languages, language groups, ethnic groups, and so on. And so in certain contexts, and that's what our conclusions led us to, in certain situations, it is not even enough to be an African or a Ghanaian to lead an evaluation. You need to go beyond to look at where the evaluation is happening, what is the culture of the people, what is the language of the people, and all of that, to let that reflect, in whom you are sending to the community to lead engagement. And in our example, or in our experience, there are several instances where you can send people to a community, and if the people don't speak, they are Ghanaians, all right. Let's say you send people who don't speak Ga to a Ga community, and even community entry will be difficult for them to do and to engage and in a meaningful conversation with the community to do any proper evaluation at all. So that should also be taken into account when we are talking about local-led or African-led evaluation, to go beyond just identity of the individual, to look at specific communities and cultural orientations of communities where we are working in. Now, what is the relationship between African-led evaluation and indigenous ways of knowing? We realize that the two are not synonymous. I mean, the African-led evaluation is not necessarily the same as indigenous ways of knowing. One can exist without the other. I mean, you can have an African-led evaluation that is not integrating indigenous ways of knowing or indigenous knowledge systems into the process. But we realize that it is important for the two to work together. If we talking about African-led evaluation, it is important that we also promote or advocate for an integration of the knowledge, indigenous knowledge systems or practices or ways of knowing into the principles that we apply for African-led or Made in Africa evaluation. So as I've said before, the African-led evaluation, generally we can say it's when we have Africans leading and taking major control in the evaluation process. But the indigenous ways of knowing also describes how we use our local, cultural, and philosophical orientations to inform, our methodologies and how we gather information and even analyze them and share them, And as we have been said before, this includes things like storytelling, symbolic interaction, people sharing their life experiences, even spiritual practices, oral history, and all of that, are what we call the indigenous knowledge practices or systems. And so for this reason, even sometimes non-Africans can apply indigenous knowledge system if they are really guided well by local collaborators. And so it is important for us to know that, I mean, the two are not synonymous, but they must work together. And if you talk about indigenous knowledge systems or indigenous ways of knowing, it is not only African evaluators that can apply, even evaluators not from Africa can apply this if they are well guided and collaborate with locals in the evaluation process. So at this point, I think I made it earlier that we may have African evaluators, but if they are not intentional in adapting and integrating indigenous knowledge systems into evaluation practices, they may end up going back to the existing standardized metrics and Western-centric standards for conducting evaluations in Africa. So the key term there is what? Intentionality. Then we also discuss, okay, so then what are the markers of African-led evaluation? So flowing from the previous discussions, we agreed that, well, a truly African-led evaluation must have these features or components: use of indigenous knowledge systems, as already explained, including storytelling, local symbols, language, and so on and so forth, must be integrated into this evaluation process. Also, inclusion of intervention population, or in this case, active participation and co-creation of the evaluation design and processes with the communities and the people that the evaluation is supposed to serve. And then the methods and definition of concepts must also adapt to local meanings. So for example, if it's income that you want to measure, how do we measure income? How do we even define income? How do the people that this evaluation is serving, how do they even count or measure their income? We need to understand that and make sure it reflects very well in the definitions of terms and assessment criteria that we developed for these measurements. And then we also have to make sure that this the design of such an evaluation is culturally competent. It reflects the culture, language, and all the do's and don'ts of the people that this evaluation is supposed to serve. This is definitely not exhaustive. We can add and add, but our reflections and discussions that went into this paper came to agree on these four, but we believe it's expandable and not exhaustive at all. So having said all of that, so we then came to a discussion on, okay, when we say African-led evaluation, exactly how is it looking like, or what is how do we assess it? I realize that it's not really static, and it's not also it's not static at the moment, but it operates in a continuum or in a spectrum, right? Where Africans are engaged in evaluations at various levels, at various levels that exist. Ultimately, we are looking at where the whole process is heavily led and influenced by Africans, but in reality, we have the extremes. We have evaluations that are either designed exclusively outside Africa, and dropped down and implemented by people who are not Africans with very little, or no participation at all by Africans. We also have a situation where external evaluations are externally led, but with some minimal level of participation in terms of design and so on by Africans, even though they may not have major decision powers, to influence things. We are also moving into a situation where increasingly we are having co-creation, of evaluation and evaluation models and frameworks by Africans and external evaluators coming together. So you have Africans as part of the major players in the evaluation process, working closely with their collaborators from outside Africa. So together they create an evaluation, and implement it in Africa. Then we are also seeing some improvement in Africans leading the evaluation with their foreign or external collaborators supporting, so we have Africans now taking more active control in the evaluation process. Then the ultimate is instances where the whole process is led and controlled wholly by Africans. And I believe that is the ultimate we want to see. And I believe this is also maybe happening at some level, but that is ultimately what we want to see evaluation happening in Africa. And so based on this, we are saying that the nature of African evaluation, or the current status of how Africans are participating in evaluations is multidimensional, and it's influenced by factors. We know that these evaluations are also usually commissioned to assess projects, and these projects are usually sponsored by different sponsors or funders, largely from outside the continent. And so how evaluation is designed and how it is implemented and who has the power to implement and so on is influenced by factors that we have outlined, such as the purpose, of that the evaluation was to achieve, who is sponsoring the evaluation, who are the leaders of the project, and the whole process, and even the methodology that needs to be applied, and the need for adaptation. All of these usually influence who gets to lead the evaluation in the end. Now, when we have Africans leading evaluations, or when we have more Africans as active players in the evaluation process, does it give us any value at all? Well, generally the consensus we had was that Africans leading evaluations would tell their stories better because they can ground the evaluations more contextually better than those who are not so familiar with the African culture. And so the evaluation was also more likely to be culturally sensitive, and can be more relevant or credible, and have recommendations and results that will be more practical to implement, And so to do this, or what can lead to this, is that the African-led evaluation, or evaluations led by Africans, can have greater trust and openness from the community, because the people will know that these are our own people and they can relate better and support the evaluation to be more successful. It can also be more richer, more nuanced, in terms of the information we're able to gather, because the expectation is that these African-led evaluation will also integrate the indigenous knowledge systems and the cultural values and everything that we have already discussed. And so we will not rely on only one way of collecting data, but we'll look at all other ways that the communities, share information, and so we can get more rich information to make decisions here. It also increases ownership and uptake of the findings that may emerge from this kind of evaluation. And then the potential to acknowledge the relevance of indigenous knowledge systems, it will be higher if we have more Africans taking part or participating in evaluations in Africa. Now, to conclude, we had a few things to say. So one of them is that the African-led evaluation must be intentional to reflect the values, context, and systems in a particular context where evaluation is being implemented. Now, there's also the need to collaborate. And so all of these things that we are saying, we are not saying that we should throw away the existing frameworks and all the methodologies that we use in evaluation that did not originate from Africa. We believe that a more collaborative approach is necessary. We can still use existing frameworks, but adapt them using the indigenous knowledge systems and practices to make them more relevant to our context. And so a more collaborative approach, will lead to more innovations and flexibility in evaluation practice in Africa. And that will help us to really do evaluations that reflect the needs and aspirations of our people. We also concluded that indigenous ways of knowing, actually can enrich the methodologies that we apply, in a sense that we would be open to all sorts of knowledge and information, within the communities and localities. That will help us to evaluate project results and impact better than going with predefined evaluation frameworks and so on that are not known to the local people. And so, for this reason, we believe that it is important to invest more in capacity building evaluation in Africa. I think it's literature also demonstrates that capacity may be a challenge in Africa in terms of evaluation. And so whilst we call for more Africans to lead the evaluation process, it's also important to institutionalize and also invest more in building capacity across the board, in Africa, knowing that evaluation is also evolving with technology and with everything that the world is seeing today. We also believe that, or we also concluding that there can be more research, to gather more empirical insights on African evaluation approaches, and also the benefits in there that to be derived that can also help us to do more advocacy and to achieve higher results in terms of transitioning or getting more Africans to lead evaluations on our continent. Yeah, so that's the end of the presentation. Thank you for the attention. After that.
Thank you so much, Alex. Very insightful. Again, another presentation, very helpful for all of us. And just to remind all our participants that by the end of the webinar, we will be sharing a copy of the slides that have been used, as well as the recording, so that you can take the time to go over and process properly everything that has been shared. We have our final speaker for today. I did promise that we have a very packed schedule of speakers, expert speakers. And we have the Managing Director for Participatory Development Associates, Mr. Abbe, who will be sharing with us his thoughts on all the conversations that we've been having so far today. We've talked a lot about Indigenous knowledge systems, some of the creative and practical ways to put them into practice. And then we've looked at specifically African-led evaluations, some of the markers and some of the ways in which it can be carried out. So I want to hand over now to Adam, and he will take us through the final presentation before we open the floor for questions.
Okay, Asida, thank you very much, and thanks to everyone for the participation thus far, and also being part of this ongoing conversation. And many of you practitioners, it's been a campaign, for some time now, about how we ensure that evaluations are reflective of the context and then also the voices of the people from whom interventions are presented. Now, Alex and Diddy they presented different perspectives on various ways in which we can look at how indigenous evaluation practices can take place. And then also Alex, even in the end, talk about some of the balances about where should we find a middle ground. And currently, I'm part of another work on the same assignment. And then we are looking at, okay, if indigenous evaluation processes that are championing decolonization of the process have three key interrelated components where we talk about power balances in the evaluation process. We talked about the methodological design. It talks about the process where we look at the collaborative and co-creation, which is the equity in design, and we look at equity in implementation and interpretation, and then evaluative evidence generation and use. And this is where some interesting things are coming up, and it's something also we could brainstorm on further. For instance, we are all very familiar with the Ghanaians on this call with the storytelling cycle of Anansi. We talk about the Anansi stories. Okay, so what of having a model, the Anansi evaluation model, that integrates the Ghanaian value systems, that shapes contextual validity and also processes into that? where we are using that to analyze the lived experiences of multiple voices in the project space, which is what we look at, and we look at it from the Ghanaian perspective in the ethics of the context that it is from. And that also linked, for instance, in Rwanda, where they have the annual genocide commemoration, and as part of that, they have what they call the Kwibuka, which is a moment to remember. And I'm just currently studying that whole process to say, what if we have a Kwibuka framework where it's a moment for deep reflection using the various processes, and they have a social structure where they have the village structure, the district structure, and also the national structure, which have village processes of how governance, accountability of a decision project and everything, with people participating in the process. So what about having that component of it, and then moving further to see how the evidences from those conversations could be analyzed? And now we have ways. When it comes to the quantification of those analyses, for instance, it's used the traditional quantification processes, but the mode of generation of these things is rooted directly into in the frameworks and the culture of the people, and that builds a strong contextual validity and reliability in the process, because the people can identify with the evaluation process, and that makes it easier for decision making. That makes it easier for policy uptake at the local, subnational levels, and even at the national level. And also that also makes people to participate in the process strongly as well. And then if we look at how the sociocultural norms of the people then shapes what is emerging, then it builds that strong evaluation validity. And it's a conversation, for instance, I threw to Jimefa in a conversation we did. What if now Jimefa leads a process where we develop our own framework for civil society evaluation and project intervention in Ghana, where the annual civil society forum, for instance, we present that based on what is ours, created by ourselves, and then also we use for the evaluation. That could be a strong way for building this. And many people ask this question too, what's the difference with these processes and things we're talking about in line with the OECD methods and all that? They've come a long way. They've started from somewhere, and anybody who followed those processes realized that there have been revisions of the models, how they are defined and all that. And it's the same way we should allow these processes to start, and then we build it and integrate it into that. For instance, if we have a model where the silent voices, where voices of young people in this whole mining communities or communities across and everything, but getting them to express that through arts, through photo voice. At the point of a design and expression, it is them reflecting on their lived experiences in these communities. Now, just asking them then to talk through what they have illustrated or what they have drawn and everything gives them the room to make sure that their voices are heard whilst talking about these processes. And that could become a strong way to ensure that the silent voices, so we are making all voices count in the process. And it's about we who are leading the practice, we who are engaging, that must be intentional to bring to the fore some of these things that are happening as well. And that links to the third component of it is when we talk about the participatory process of this. One, it should be that collaborative co-creation process at various levels. And you know, we try to say, oh, we engage the community to get the communities buy-in. I think we've moved beyond getting communities and their buy-in. We want the communities to be part of shaping that process as well, and not that they are rushed through. You inform them today, tomorrow you are collecting your information, and when we finish collecting the information and we are gone, we just go to analyze it in our reports and then that's it. But we have to get it back to the community, the people from whom we collected this information, and then for them to look at what they actually contributed to in the process as well. Then that gives room for the divergent voices so that we are not just extracting always from the communities. We are also giving back in terms of making sure that there is that collective reasoning around the process. And when we create people capacities for them to locally facilitate these processes, then that drives the impact further, and that also drives the contextualization and participatory of the process further. So it is how do we get these people and the communities to facilitate portions or even part of that, because we build that to them. It is only when we make room for them and we take our cap off as experts, but as facilitators who go to the field and just let the facilitate processes for people to generate these informations based on their experiences, what they see it to be, and then we also just analyze it as such. And in some cases, even just keep it as the evidence is presented, just in a manner that it can be understood. And that build that strong point. So just to conclude here quickly to say, what if we start the conversation about building our own evaluation frameworks? It's just an alternative to make sure our voices are heard the way we want them to be heard. And I agree that there is the power dynamics and imbalance in the interglobal evaluation ecosystem, because the evaluation results have multiple stakeholders and interests, and there are people who are funding and all that. But we here also have the skills to co-create and build that process. So what if we take that challenge and we allow GMF? Afria is already leading a strong process in the Made in Africa evaluation with evaluation principles and others. What if the country voluntary groups, we start taking those up and working to nationalize our own evaluation frameworks to analyze things based on how we want it analyzed and how we want it seen? What if we have ways to integrate, as I said earlier, our traditional storytelling system, the Anansi framework, the Nkabom model, where we come together, have collective reflective evaluation practices at the community level? What if we look at how we can share these stories back, this impact back to communities, for the communities to be able to appreciate what they have contributed to over the period through community murals? We can look at that and even link it to some poetry, dance, and other things that communities are creating. creating, and what if we have a framework we call our own at various national, community, and district levels that is linked to our own national growth development agenda and how we want our aspiration of growth. Thank you very much, Asida. And these are questions for all of us to reflect on in the process.
Thank you, Adam, and thank you for those thoughts. They are very thought-provoking questions. I like that although so much progress has been made, there's so much more room for growth and expanding the whole conversation about Made in Africa, local-led evaluation, Indigenous knowledge systems. It's now time for questions. We've opened the floor. As I mentioned earlier, you can either put your question in the chat box or use the Q&A functionality in Microsoft Teams, or even just raise your hand, and then we can call on you and give you the opportunity. We'll unmute you so that you can ask your question. We still have all our speakers on call. They are more than ready and willing to answer any questions that may come up. There's also opportunity for comments. If you have any contributions that you would like to make, your work is also within the same lane of thought or lane of practice, please feel free to comment using the chat box or raise your hand, and then I can call on you. Yeah, I can see that everyone is still processing all that we've heard. Yes, they've been very great presentations from all the speakers. We had Mrs. Diddy Muard from the Ghana Monitoring and Evaluation Forum first, and she spoke a little bit about Indigenous knowledge systems, and then delved into some of the very practical ways that this can be practiced. I think she referred to the Nkoswo, which she promised us that we would hear a little bit more about. I'm not sure that we did, and then she also talked about the Tory Day methodology that's being used in Cameroon. And then we heard from Alexander Afram, followed by Abbe, both of Participatory Development Associates. All right, we have our first question from Ernest, who is appreciating the insightful presentations, and he's asking which one is more important between African-led evaluation and then the use of indigenous ways of knowing. Which one is more important? I don't know which of our speakers would like to address that. You can feel free to just unmute and go ahead.
Okay. After that, so I'm here. I believe that it's not the question of whether one is important than the other. In fact, the two are important, but the starting point is promoting the participation of Africans in the evaluation process, right? I think that is the whole idea behind the Made in Africa evaluation, having more Africans to lead evaluations. And then once they are in there, we also need to acknowledge that our own knowledge systems and ways of knowing, which collectively we are calling the Indigenous Knowledge Systems, are also valid and relevant. And so in designing evaluations, they must be open to these ideas and these ways of knowing as well, and integrate them into the evaluation practice. And so I would say that the indigenous knowledge practices or ways of knowing must go with the African-led evaluation or the Made in Africa evaluation, together. So as we advocate a call for more African participation evaluation, we must not leave behind the integration or inclusion of knowledge, of our knowledge systems in that process. And I think that's the point Adam was trying to make, that how do we ensure that these ways of knowing and practices are also accepted as valid, means of conducting evaluations on our continent. So I believe that they must work together.
Thank you very much, Alex. And I believe that came out very well across the various speakers' presentations. All right, I see a hand up. Paul, I think I saw your hand up. We can just unmute you so that you can ask your question. Mr. Paul Achu, if your hand was up, or if you have a comment.
Yeah, Mike, I just have a brief question. I think the knowledge shared have been very good, but I just want to find out how do we share, or how do we see the value applied to some of this indigenous knowledge as a practitioners, or as we are calling it, in terms of African made, because the collaboration between the Africa perspective, for example, from the English-speaking country and then the French-speaking country within Africa. How do we, in terms of decolonize this information, how do we see the value, or how do we apply some of this value so that we can call it in our own, or identify some of these indigenous value in our day-to-day activities, or within our organization, or in our individual practices?
Okay. So Paul is asking about how this can work out in practice and in reality, especially considering the different or sometimes the diverse populations across Africa. So if it's African-led, even among ourselves, we need to be agreed. So for example, between the Francophone and then the Anglophone aspects of Africa, how do we make sure that that collaboration is done effectively when we are developing one African framework for local-led evaluation? And also, I think I heard him ask more also about how to make sure that in our practical day-to-day lives this works. And I see both Dede and Edem. So I think Dede, I'll give you the floor first, and then maybe afterwards Edem can take over as well.
Okay, thank you, Asida. So yes, I think some work has already been done in documenting some of these things so that we have it in, languages that cut across borders. So like in English, and I believe the Francophone also have some of this documentation. In fact, in Ghana, the University of Development Studies is actually doing some work on coming up with a framework and some tools that we can use documented, so it's easy to share across different countries. And our interest as practitioners in that process was to ensure that it's not so academic that it's purely for the classroom, but it's something that we can use as practitioners. So when that work is done, we should have some frameworks out that we can all use. And I'm sure, because they include Senegal and some other Francophone countries, it will be in both French and English. And I know the MasterCard Foundation is supporting to ensure that it's being done in the other parts of Africa. So it's likely to come out in Portuguese as well, and the other languages. So I think we are beginning to get to the point where we are documenting so we can share across borders. Also that the standards, it's no longer just the DAC OECD that we have, but AFREA has also established African standards that are documented. So if you go to the AFREA website, you will find out that there are a list of standards for Made in Africa evaluation. Thank you.
Thank you to Dede. Thank you, Auntie Dede. Yes, Edem, did you want to add up to that before we take the next set of questions?
Yes. So Dede has addressed part of that about the collaborative that's going on, because we have AFREA is facilitating both Francophone and Anglophone collaborations currently. And then we also have an all-African collaborative process ongoing. Diddy talked about what's happening at UDS. And then we also have University of Botswana. We have other entities from southern part of Africa and eastern part of Africa that are looking at these dimensions of it. And then also we have practitioner entities like Abbe, PDA, and others also having to integrate some of these things now into our evaluation processes. So some form of this are currently happening, Paul. And then also what is critical now is the consciousness of it, because we have, I mean, FRIA has principles now that is guiding this. We have also the frameworks, different forms of it coming up, being tailored around some of these things. So as the conversation is ongoing, consciousness and new thoughts are emerging, we are seeing better ways to document these processes and then also facilitate that cross-country collaborative and conversation, because it is not that they are new, they have been there. We are trying to bring them to the fore and then make them reflect our identity more. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Adam. And I see that Sarah had asked a question in the chat. I think Auntie Dede kind of touched on it, but let the others ask their questions first, and then if there's a little bit more time, we'll come back to Sarah. So I see Vili Magero. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. You can unmute and ask your question,
Yes.
and then Margaret can ask afterwards. All right.
Yes, thank you so much. You've pronounced the name right. Now, I would like to thank the presenters. They have brought in a very worthy conversation, and I especially liked the trigger that we've been given by the last presenter. But I'm coming from the fact that most of our African countries were former colonies. You look at some of the records that we have in the archives have a lot of silences. They have not really captured some of the feel and the nuances that we have within the African context. So I don't know if it will be a question or a comment, and maybe all the presenters or somebody knowledgeable in this area would help me to understand. In ways of knowing, sometimes we need to consult the archives. We need to consult the archival records. So to what extent does this hamper our evaluation processes? And to what extent does that have to influence the frameworks that we build from an African context? And I'm asking this based on the fact that there's a serious clamor to bring back some of our records. And looking again at how even some of these records are indexed, they are yet to really capture the essence of the Africanness that we are looking for. So I'm just in this world where I'm asking a lot of questions in that regard, and maybe either it's a conversation that you can take forward, or if somebody has the immediate answers, it would be interesting and good to hear some of the suggestions. Thank you.
Thank you, Vili. Very, very deep questions. Margaret, I don't know if you want to come before. Maybe I'll let Adam take the first stab, and then Alex can add on.
Okay, thank you very much. Pardon me if I am not, my question do not fall in line with the discussion. I am a finance person, but I am thinking aloud. Since in the African context, we don't have donors within. All our donors are we have foreign donors. So assuming you you work on a project and now the external donors want to do an evaluation, how do we merge this proposed framework and the framework that they are having to evaluate you on the impact of the project. I don't know whether there is a way or they have thought through based on Auntie Dede's presentation and the Mr. Afram's presentation, whether there is a way that they can merge these two so that the external evaluators will be able to have a very, should I say, a merge, maybe the deliverables or whatever they count, the outputs. I don't know how to put it, but I'm looking at, you don't have the fund. Somebody has given you the fund. Then you want to use the framework that you have developed to suit your context. Whilst the person has another way of tools to do the evaluation, whether there is a way that these two can speak to each other. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Margaret. I'm sure that's a question on a lot of people's minds as well. So I'm going to let Adam take a stab at it first, and then after that, we would see any of the other speakers want to address it. Yes, Adam, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. And two very great questions here. I would want to take it from the last speaker, the one asked by Margaret, if I'm correct. Yeah, so Margaret, you're perfectly right. And that is what has been the status quo all this while about just designing to fit, quote unquote, the donor interest for the purposes of donor accountability. But we, together with them also, they're realizing that beyond that, there is a whole issue about real impact and change and how the evidence could be used to make decisions. Because when we continue on that westernization of the process, they are able to do what the accountability, but then we are unable to use that for well-informed decision. Because, I mean, we say this, for instance, when we do, those who do a lot of the difference in indifference, randomized controls, very complex ones, which are great, I mean, but then our local communities don't do sigma fx over dy and all that. They could see that it could be rigorous, but they are not able to identify with that for effective decision making. And at times, the local policymaker or local structures, if you are looking at the gender-based violence, for instance, and we do an effective RCT, which is great for that. Beyond that, the RCT methodology and all those things do not really make sense to the local communities, and it needs to be analyzed in a way that they could identify with it. That is where the real change would happen. So if you look at Alexis' presentation, for instance, we're talking about, there are some of them, there have to be some middle ground on that to ensure that, yes, where the funds are coming from, there is that accountability, and also to ensure that the people that are the recipients of the intervention, the communities, are able to have strong voice in the process so that they could identify with whatever evidence that is generated. And then they agree, as we are building these standardizations, they are also looking at it, because we've been having conversations also with them. So that's one aspect of it. Then on is it Vili, if I'm right, question. It's true, there is the whole issue of historical suppression of knowledge system and practices, of which then we reduce them to it being informal. Oh, I mean, our traditional whatever systems we go, they are informal. They are naive. There's all sorts of adjectives that we use to, but that is actually the practices of the people that have been suppressed over the period and then documented differently. So bringing out the Africanness in the process is to make sure that these practices are coming strongly to the fore, where we look at how the processes of generating the evidence are shaped by what we do. I mean, there is this thing that we say, I think, and it's also in one of the papers that we work in, that there have always been traditional means of decision making, and there have always been ways where these our local actors, our local leaders, they also collect various forms of data, various forms of information to go and then have conversation to make decision. When you listen, for instance, to the late Dr. Sule Gaiba, he tell you that when they tell you they are going to see in Ghana, they say they are going to see that Brewa or whatever. They are going to look for various informations to have various conversations before they come up with decisions. Now, why do we keep that process opaque? Why don't we bring those processes to the fore? Because they make very important decisions with that process. So if we collectively continue to engage and discuss those processes will not always just be in the bosom of some few elders in the society, but it becomes integral in the local level decision making as well. And then that then brings in the African identity in the process, and the Africanness in the process that we could look at. And just bit, I think this Sarah also has a question in the chat that I've seen that I think is also linked to this Africanness bit. So when we are able to, which is what we are pushing now, start to develop training programs in these areas, and then we're working with universities like what UDS is doing in Ghana, what University of Botswana is doing, what is happening in some institutions in Kenya and others. Then gradually this is being integrated into our education curriculums. Now some of the institutions are developing monitoring and evaluation programs in various levels, diploma, degree, master's level, and also there are short courses for capacity building. And then we also have other practitioner organizations now connecting with the Ghana Monitoring Evaluation Forum and the voluntary evaluation groups now to be building capacities with some of these frameworks and methodologies. And that is the way of building the Africanness and gradually seeking to institutionalize the Africanness in this process. It will take some time. It's just like how our practices, indigenous practices, has been systematically marginalized over the period. It's going to take quite some time, but this is the process to start the conversation and pushing it forward in our evaluation designs across various sectors and disciplines. Thank you.
Thank you, Adam. That's quite a comprehensive answer we have there. We have one other question. Yes, indeed. Philly is sharing that we do have a lot to do to contextualize our world in the African context so that we'll be able to tell our story in a very believable and convincing way. We have one more question in the chat, and I'm going to throw it to Alex. I think we haven't heard so much from him. Harriet is asking, what is one small step that we can all take in our work to make sure that we are honoring indigenous knowledge systems, even if the overall ecosystem has not yet changed? What is one small step that we can all take in our work?
Okay, so I think there's no one, you can do many things. There's no one size fits all approach to this, but I believe that the first step is for us to acknowledge that these indigenous knowledge systems exist and they are valid and they can be applied, in our workplace, and to then once we believe that and we acknowledge them, and then wherever we work, whatever community that we find ourselves in, I believe that these things, they vary from place to place, like because of the multicultural environment that we find ourselves. And so we need to acknowledge where we are and what really exists and how do things happen, what beliefs and values and systems are applicable and are relevant. How are they applicable in our work? What can we do? What can we implement? How can we apply these things in our line of work? And then maybe we can take the step to begin to make these small changes, So if it's in our case, in our context, we are researchers. So if we have an opportunity to do a research, for example, we can be intentional about how we are going to collect data in a community. We need to engage communities to gather qualitative information. We can be intentional to say, well, instead of going with only structured tools, we can organize other engagements, with the communities, such as, we can have a story time, for example, to hear people's stories, and all of that. So we can integrate some of these things beyond the tools that we have. There are instances, for example, in PDA that I remember there was a time we did a study where we were going to collect some kind of quantitative information to understand how, to understand the income levels and income status of people, and categorize them as to whether they are poor, they are rich, or and so on. And we did this by what we call community census, right? And when we after identifying everybody in the community, we bring some people together in the community to discuss, okay, when we say somebody is rich in this community, who is that person? What defines somebody as rich? What are the characteristics of that person? Then they help us to identify. Then we go further to say, okay, so after doing all of these things, how do we identify, or how do we classify the households and the people that we have identified in this community? So they will help you to do that, without us telling them that, okay, based on how much you earn, we think that you are poor. And so I'm just saying that once we understand and know the systems that exist, we can take that one small step and be intentional to integrate them into our daily works. And I think when we do that, we'll be changing the narrative in our own small way, and hopefully that will cascade, and the future we can have it, at a broader and a wider level as well. Yeah, thank you. I hope that's a response to the question.
Believe that it has. So thank you very much, Alex. And thank you to everybody that has been able to join in. I know that the networks have been a bit unstable with the rains and all, but we are very grateful for everybody who made the time and all the questions that have come. Thank you to our speakers. Thank you to the questions, and then even to those who have just shared their thoughts in terms of everything that we have been talking about. We are really grateful to you. We also have on call Clement Sefanya, who is the technical advisor, principal technical advisor on issues of research, evaluation, and learning for PDA. And we want to let him give us the closing remarks and then bring this webinar to a close. Thank you. Over to you, Clement. Hello, Clement, if you are with us. Okay. If we can just unmute him. Okay. Sorry, Clement, please go ahead.
Okay, yeah. Can you hear me all right?
Fine, clear.
Fantastic. Yes. So I think thanks a lot, Asada, for facilitating this conversation, but also most importantly, for all those three very brilliant submissions. I think like Diddy said from the outset, this is testament to the quality of work PDA does, but also the kind of novelty we try to bring into the conversation around indigenous knowledge systems and the way we conceive and produce knowledge. I think for me, three things stand out from these brilliant conversations. First one is that, and that I think is from both Dede and Alex's presentation, that even Adams as well, African-led evaluation or indigenous-led evaluation is important. And the Made in Africa evaluation being touted by Afram and other local evaluation bodies suggests that this is the way to go. Although there's always a caveat that with all the nuances that Alex's presentation brought, that having people from indigenous origin does not suggest that indeed indigenous knowledge systems will be used, because there's more to the use of knowledge, the acquisition and use of knowledge than just being from a local context. You need more, you need some expertise, you need the willingness to reproduce local knowledges, but also you need to be sure you yourself as a local person are not, or we ourselves as local persons are not gatekeepers of Western knowledge systems, because often we find ourselves in places where we struggle to remove the shackles of those Western systems so that we are leading but not adopting indigenous knowledge systems. So that's really very important, really, to get past that point of making evaluation bottom up and relevant to local context. I mean, that's not to discount that, like has been said, external knowledges and external expertise isn't important, but if you really are talking about locally led evaluation, then it has to be genuinely and properly so. We've also learned, second point, that indigenous knowledge systems are important for local, granular level understanding of things. And all the stories, all the cases from Cameroon, from Ghana, that Dede, Alex, and Adam have illustrated, suggest this. And indeed, the framework that Adam presented offers us a holistic perspective into thinking about both locally led evaluation, but also indigenous knowledge systems. I think the third key thing that we really need to take with us as well as we go is that it is not only interviews and the sorting of people's perspective that gives us the richness of what the local knowledge systems offer. And that deviation from going to sit with people to ask them questions, no matter how well-intentioned they are, they would always forget something or overlook some things, or just look at you and tell you what you want to hear. There are all kinds of nuances that make that a bit defective. And that's why that methodology that was presented, that autoethnography, which also brings the expertise of experts in local context to bear in terms of co-creating knowledge system, becomes very important. And finally, what to keep in mind as well is that when we talk about knowledge, and I think we've said it, and it can't be overstated in this case, we are talking of both verbal and non-verbal communication. So the feelings people have. If someone asked a question about, well, what do you do with archives and the unspoken feelings and ideologies sitting in museums and archival centers, but also sitting in the way we communicate through the drawings people write on the walls, through arts and culture, through movies and symbols that people present their feelings through. Those are all important. And I think we need to get to a point where indigenous knowledge systems are also inculcating these and making very good use of them. And I guess the whole webinar today has illustrated that that's possible, and that we should get past verbal to non-verbal and a holistic knowledge gathering for evaluation that's relevant to local context. So look, I think I'm not. I think there will be a vote of thanks properly, but mine has just to say, has just to say thank you and a really rich discussion here. Storytelling, orature, however you call it, but also even symbols and representations, voices and representations, but also even silences that people have about their communities and feelings are all very important. That helps us to have a holistic Indigenous knowledge systems for evaluation. And I congratulate PD and the team for doing this as well. Well, thanks. I said I'll give it back to you, but well done.
Thank you very much, Clemens, for helping to put together so succinctly everything that we've discussed and talked about. And Indigenous knowledge systems in evaluation practice. We are very glad that you're able to take the time to be with us. And we look forward to more of such conversations. Do remember to check us out, our website at pdaghana.com, and also to find us on social media across the various platforms, Participatory Development Associates. We look forward to hearing from you by email, by text, by call. You can also visit any of our offices in Accra and or Kumasi. Thank you all so much, and we look forward to having you again for our third webinar of the year. That will be next quarter. All the very best, and have a wonderful day. Bye.